Some breaking news out of Gaza that I feel I had to discuss tonight, as there is not a lot of coverage on this right now. I want to say surprisingly, but considering how this has been treated, not all that surprising. But this is an image out of Rafah in Gaza where a tent, a large tent of Palestinian civilians was bombed by the Israeli government. And this tent sat close to an UNRWA headquarters. And this is only a couple days following the ICJ ruling that Israel must end its military operation in Rafah. So, it was obvious they were going to violate this, but this is such a clear, defiant act that has now resulted in the deaths of 35. And the IDF is saying it is going to investigate. We're going to get to there are the countless lies that have come from the Israeli government over just the past 6 months alone, let alone, the years and years before that. But I want to be clear here. So there are some videos that are going around Twitter that I simply cannot share because this video would be pulled off YouTube for obvious reasons. As Mehdi Hassan writes here, there are videos coming out of Rafah today of beheaded babies, actual beheaded babies that you can see for yourselves, not the beheaded babies that the Israeli authorities invented to justify the genocidal assault, or the ones that Biden falsely claimed to have seen pics of. So when I get to the Al Jazeera video, they edit around that. So you're going to see some of the imagery from, the aftermath of the strike, but not some of the more extreme imagery from that. As Al Jazeera English writes, Gaza office says that Israel has targeted at least 10 displacement centers affiliated with UNRWA in the past 24 hours. Again, appears to be a clear point being made here by the Israeli government against the UN. A recent attack on Rafah was carried out using 7 2,000-pound bombs. And as Miranda Cleland writes here, 2,000-pound American bombs are indiscriminate by nature and are designed to level city blocks. When you see a dead child who looks like they're asleep, no visible wounds, it's because the pressure from these massive bombs exploded their organs. Israel dropped them on tents tonight. Yet this is the way the IDF describes it. The IDF said its Air Force struck a Hamas compound in Rafah and that the strike was carried out, quote, with precise ammunition and on the basis of precise intelligence, saying the strike took out the Hamas chief of staff for the West Bank and another senior Hamas official behind deadly attacks on Israelis. Let's pretend this is even true, because again, it's impossible to trust the IDF on anything they say. But let's pretend this is accurate. Does that justify using 2,000-pound bombs that clearly are going to also kill innocent civilians, including women and children that were killed in the strike? The reason why this continues to be such a focus and such a massive deal is because this is currently being supported by the Biden administration, not to mention other allies like the UK, like Canada, that continue to turn their faces away from all of this monstrosity that is ongoing. They're unwilling to recognize the obvious terrorists that the Israeli government are. Here's a clip from Al Jazeera English, in the discussion around what this refugee camp was.
Can you just give us an idea of just how many people were packed into such a tiny area and the types of shelters that they were actually living in?
Okay, so this is a makeshift tent, and people chose to make their tents very close to an UNRWA warehouse because they thought that UNRWA is a safe place and the Israeli forces are not going to target anything related to UNRWA or to the UN. It's a makeshift tent. It's a size of a football field and maybe a little bit bigger. It's a very crowded place. Palestinians were setting up their tents. They're either tents or a handmade tent with fabrics like a cloth or a plastic. That's why fire caught the whole place. It was targeted by 8 missiles, and people were getting ready to sleep because it's night, So people were getting ready to sleep. They finished a very hectic day as Rafah has been targeted a couple of times since the morning. It's a very densely populated area because the Israeli forces ordered people from the eastern sides of Rafah to evacuate towards the western parts of Rafah. This area was designated by the Israeli forces as a safe area, as a humanitarian area. They claim that people will be safe if they evacuated there, and Palestinians listened to the orders of the Israeli forces. But again, the Israeli forces targeted a safe area where Palestinians thought it was safe. But at the end of the day, Palestinians recognize that nowhere in the Gaza Strip is safe.
Yeah, and obviously we have seen many UN aid workers killed over the last 8 months since October the 7th there as well.
This idea that this is anything except terrorism is wild. It is clear what the Israeli government is doing. This is an obvious genocide, strike after strike, indiscriminate bombing after indiscriminate bombing. Make it obvious. And once again, another example of Israel telling people a place to go that is safe and then bombing that very place. This is a story from December. To understand how often, how long running this practice is, and just by the way, in the past 6 months, I'm not even including pre-October 7th, which there's a long history there of Israel doing the very same thing. But post-October 7th, Israel continues bombarding Gaza, including places it told Palestinians to evacuate to. So again, this is December 9th. They did the same thing here with this strike. Just unbelievable. Now, so there's a thread here. The thread is now out of date because I don't think it's been updated since April 23rd. But that said, as of April 23rd, there's at least 20 to 30 examples here of Israel just lying, constantly lying. So I pulled out 2 examples that maybe closely mirror this recent strike, or I should say that the claims around this recent strike. So as Mohammed Shihada writes here, in March, after bragging about bombing a Hamas terrorist with an RPG and being challenged on this lie, Israel quietly admitted those were 2 starved Gazan civilians, one with a bike and the other with a bag of flour. In January, Israel claims 12 UNRWA workers took part on October 7th and that thousands of UNRWA staff are Hamas and PIJ members. 4 months later, 0 evidence is presented by Israel to support this. Israel killed over 170 UNRWA workers. I'm thinking back to how big of a story it was when Israel claimed that Hamas worked with UNRWA, or UNRWA was Hamas, and that that made international headlines. Oh, this is a huge deal. We have all these countries must stop funding UNRWA. And then, in terms of this, and by the way, this is from Haaretz. This is an Israel-based newspaper. There has been, at the very least, the coverage on the obvious lie that Israel told has not matched the lie that was propagated by those same outlets. But there was never any evidence of this. And still, to this day, people think that Israel's, whether it's their questioning of UNRWA or maybe even the bombing of UNRWA, they think it is justified based on the lies that Israel told. Here's AIPAC with an incredible tweet. This war ends today if Hamas surrenders and frees the hostages. First reply from AIPAC Tracker completely exposes that bullshit. Hamas accepts Gaza ceasefire deal. Israeli officials reject prospect of war ending. And in fact, according to the report, Hamas was guaranteed by the U.S. for a full Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. and that Israeli forces will not continue fighting once the hostages are released. An Israeli official told Haaretz that, quote, Israel will under no circumstances agree to end the war as part of a deal and is determined to enter Rafah. This idea that, it's if only Hamas would return the hostages, then the war ends. They have no interest in ending the war. As I've covered in other videos, there have been several instances of a ceasefire deal being on the table, and it is the Netanyahu government that has rejected it. Last thing here, and this just goes to how depraved, as Lewis writes here, Lewis Alday writes, how depraved a lot of Western media is. Quote, it is possible to kill children legally, end quote, is one of the most depraved sentences I've ever read. It shows the depths that publications like The Atlantic, run by a former IDF prison guard who assaulted Palestinian detainees, have descended to try and justify the unjustifiable. And yes, this is actually in a piece in The Atlantic.